Our goal today is to better understand what emotions are and how we experience emotions. If you look on the screen, what an emotion is this integration between what is happening within our mind, what is happening due to the physiological responses, due to the external stimulus that is eliciting an emotion, in addition to a specific observable behavior. So if we use an example of an individual experiencing anger, let's say that you are driving and the person cuts you off. And because of your experience of anger, if we look at the bodily response, immediately as that person cuts you off, you might swerve, you might press on the gas, or you might slam on the brakes. And as such, your body goes into that fight or flight response. So the increased heart rate, the sweating, the dilated pupils, all of those things we would see as the physiological response or the bodily response due to anger. In addition, some of your expressive behavior that would be observable. You might be screaming profanities at the individual. Um, you might be crying if you got into an accident, something along those lines. And then the conscious experience is what is happening in your mind as a result of experiencing the anger. Are you thinking that this person is a terrible driver? Are you scared as a response? So then it switches emotions, which causes you then to slow down. But ultimately, as we try to understand emotions, we are looking at this integrated response of these three components. What is happening physiologically within our body, what is happening within our mind, and then what is the observable behavior due to the emotion that we are experiencing. So when we try to look at various emotions, there really is no one specific emotion or one specific theory that is correct. Um, we have a whole bunch of different theories in psychology to explain this, in large part because each one is incomplete. And they disagree with one another in terms of which came first. Is it the bodily response, the physiological responses, and then the thoughts that we have to allow us to experience the emotion, or is it the other way around? So really, when we look at these theories today, it's very much like the chicken and the egg debate. Which one came first? Was it the chicken, the egg? But instead of chickens and eggs, we are looking at body as well as the emotion or the cognitions that the person is experiencing. There is one theory that is not mentioned in your textbook. It is the common sense theory of emotion. This is how most people explain how they generally experience emotion. In response to the external stimulus here, the snarling dog, the individual will say that they are experiencing the emotion of fear. And then as a result of experiencing the emotion of fear, they have then the physiological changes within their body. Their heart might be increasing in rate. They are perspiring. They are breathing heavier and faster. Some of the observable response might also be that they are starting to back away or that they start to run. But in this case, with common sense theory of emotion, which is really the first attempt to try and explain how humans experience emotion, is that we are looking at the thoughts, the cognitions, the conscious fear, the emotion is occurring before the physiological changes. So we say in this case, because we are afraid, then we have these physiological changes. And as we look at some of the other theories today, that's not always going to be the case. Some individuals are going to offer slightly different approaches to how we experience emotions. So the next attempt to try and explain our theories of emotions were American psychologist William James and Danish psychologist Carl Lange. These two individuals disagreed with the common sense theory because they said that it wasn't the fact that the emotion comes first and then the body. As they were studying individuals, they were finding that individuals were reporting that the physiological responses were occurring first, and then the individual was experiencing an emotion. So for this, the body comes first, and then the emotion occurs afterwards. So the individual is crying first, and then as a result of crying, the individual might assign fear as a response, going back to our example of the dog. To help you remember this, if you can remember with James and Lange, alphabetically, J comes before L. Very similarly with the body and then the emotion, B comes before E. So body comes first and then emotion second. While James and Lange had this approach to try and explain how we experience emotion, there was another group of American psychologists that disagreed with James and Lange, as well as with the common sense theory of emotion, and that was Cannon and Bard. These two psychologists said that the body and the emotion, or the physiological responses and the emotion, don't occur separately. It's not one occurring before the other, as is the case with Common Sense and James and Lange, but rather what Cannon and Bard were saying is that we experience both the physiological response and the emotion at the exact same time. When they were studying individuals, they found that the individuals had a difficult time stating which thing came first. Did they become aware of the conscious response to their body, the physiological changes, or did the emotion come first? And there was no clear answer for the individuals that they were studying, so they just simply stated that they occurred simultaneously. So if we go back to our example with the snarling dog, the individual would see the dog, and then as a result, they would both experience the physiological changes, the increased heart rate, the perspiration, the breathing, as well as the emotion of fear at the exact same time. One does not come before the other. And then in addition to Cannon and Bard, James and Lange, and the common sense theory of emotion, there were two other American psychologists that disagreed with the previous three and said that when we experience emotion, it does not matter which component comes first, but rather what matters is the cognitive label that we assign to the emotion. And that is our fourth theory of emotion, Schachter and Singer's two-factor theory of emotion. For them, as they were studying individuals, they were studying what they coined the spillover effect. The spillover effect is essentially when a person experiences an emotion that can, in one context, influence how they feel in another context. So, for example, if an individual that you are sitting next to in class is angry, but you are not feeling angry, but your interaction with that person is very frustrating. As a result, it can make you feel angry as well and become a little bit more hostile towards that individual, despite the fact that at the beginning of class you really were not experiencing any sort of hostility towards the person. So for Schachter and Singer, they add in this other component in regards to the body response, and then the awareness, the conscious awareness of what is happening within our body. The third thing that they add is the label. The emotion to them does not exist until we specifically label what emotion we are experiencing. So for example, imagine in this scenario that you have the physiological responses of increased heart rate, that you are perspiring, that your breathing is a little bit more increased. But if we look at the context as to why you are experiencing the emotion here of anxiety, it's because you have to stand in front of the student body and deliver a speech. Whereas in another situation or another context, you have those exact same physiological responses: the increased heart rate, the increased perspiration, the faster breathing. However, now the context is you are walking down a street at night and you hear a random noise, and now instead of feeling anxious due to the physiological responses, you are now labeling this as fear because you are not sure what caused that loud noise. So for Schachter and Singer, the key thing here is the context in which we are experiencing the physiological response, because the context in which we experience the physiological response, that will in fact determine the emotion that we experience. In addition to Schachter and Singer, Cannon and Bard, and James and Lange, these, and Common Sense as well, rather, these all have in common that we are looking at a conscious experience of emotion. But if we look at psychology, that is not always the case. There are two other individuals, Zients and Ledoux. These two theorists and psychologists suggested that when we experience emotion, we don't really worry about what is happening consciously. Rather, the emotions that we experience are traveling on the very low road, very subconscious level as to how we experience emotions. For example, with Zients, Zients suggested that when we have many emotional reactions, apart from our conscious interpretation of a situation. So for example, you might meet someone and almost instantaneously you like that person, but consciously you're not really sure why you like that person. So you experience the emotions of happiness. Or you may have another interaction with another person that you just met, and for some reason this person rubs you the wrong way. And you start to not really like this person, but you're not really sure why. According to Zients, all of this in terms of your emotional experience is occurring on the subconscious level. You're not very much aware as to why. And then Ledoux, agreeing with Zients, saying that we do experience emotions on the subconscious level, Ledoux was suggesting we experience certain emotions, very primitive emotions like fear and anger and happiness, that these occur outside of our conscious awareness, that essentially we have an external stimulus to the body. Visually, we see that external stimulus or we hear that external stimulus, and the message is routed directly to our thalamus, and it causes a response in our amygdala. So in this case, for both Zients and Ledoux, which I don't think you will ever have to see and tease out the slight differences between those two, rather, if you know for Zients and Ledoux, as you see on the screen, what they both concluded is that the emotions that we have are processed without our thinking, and the emotions can occur without any sort of conscious awareness of the physiological responses happening. So again, we might fear a snake even though we know that the snake is not poisonous because, again, evolutionarily, we are predisposed to fear snakes. And then the last theory is Richard Lazarus's theory. In looking at the graphic on the right, Richard Lazarus did agree with Schachter and Singer's idea that the emotion doesn't exist until we label the emotion. However, for Richard Lazarus, what he was saying, instead of the label occurring consciously, that we are very much aware that we assign the label and we assign the emotion to the specific context, Lazarus was saying that the emotion and the labeling occurs subconsciously. For example, when you are experiencing guilt for something, you might experience that on a very subconscious level, and you're not really sure why you feel guilty for doing something. And that was a key difference for Lazarus compared to Schachter and Singer, whereas Schachter and Singer would say that you specifically process the context and the events and the behavior that occurred within that context, and that is why you experience guilt in that specific scenario. So going back to all of these theories, if we look at them, and again, just some tips to help you remember, especially the differences between James and Longa and Cannon and Bard. With James and Longa, since the body is occurring before the cognition or body is occurring before the emotion, if you can remember that alphabetically, J comes before L. Again, alphabetically, the body is coming before the emotion, or the conscious awareness of the emotion. So B comes before C, or B comes before E. That can help you remember the differences between that theory and some other ones. And then for Cannon and Bard, since the body response and the emotion are occurring simultaneously, since C and B are next to each other in the alphabet, both B and C for body and cognition or body and emotion, they are, again, very close to one another in the alphabet, so they are occurring simultaneously. This will end as part of the lecture for today. If you have any specific questions on these various theories, I will answer them individually, or if you have very specific questions, feel free to ask them when I get back. But this chart here does a good job of helping to also explain some of the subtle differences between those respective theories of emotion.